What would you do if you flew halfway around the world to surprise your mother, and a stranger opened the door of the house you paid for and told you to go around back because the maid was busy? I'm going to tell you exactly what I did, and I promise you the ending is not what you expect. Before I go any further, hit that like button right now, because this story earns it. Subscribe too, and share it with someone who's ever been underestimated by their own family, because by the end of this, you'll understand exactly why that matters. My name is Nora Whitfield. I'm 34 years old. For 7 years, I worked as a critical care nurse in Doha, Qatar. And on a Friday afternoon in early spring, I flew 20 hours home to Ohio to surprise my mother in the house I had bought for her. A house with her name nowhere on the paperwork because the deed had my name on it. A woman I had never met opened that front door, looked me up and down in my travel clothes, and said, "The help comes around back." The help she was talking about was my mother. 64 years old, kneeling on a stone patio in a black apron, scrubbing grout with a wire brush, getting the yard ready for someone else's dinner party. In the house I paid for. The house with my name on the deed sitting in my backpack. My brother and his wife had been living there for over a year. What I found once I stepped inside that house was worse than what I found in the backyard. And what I did about it before the night was over is the reason my sister-in-law still tells people that I ruined this family. I changed the locks. I changed the emergency contacts. I changed my will. And I want to walk you through every single hour of that day, because here's the part nobody in that house knew yet. I had a lawyer's appointment booked for 3 o'clock that afternoon. To understand that doorstep, you need to go back 8 years, to a kitchen table covered in unpaid bills. My father, Walter, died of a sudden heart attack on a Thursday in November. He was 61. He had a good heart in every sense except the medical one, and the insurance he'd carried barely covered the funeral. When the dust settled, my mother, Grace, was 56 years old, a part-time seamstress who altered wedding dresses and hemmed pants for other people, and she was sitting on $62,000 of his medical debt. I was 26, 3 years into my nursing career, working night shifts at a regional hospital outside Columbus. I picked up every extra shift the schedule would allow. Weekends, holidays, double pay on New Year's Eve. It still wasn't enough. The interest on that debt grew faster than my paycheck did. My brother, Adam, was 29 at the time. He had his own house, his own young family starting, his own plans. I don't blame him for staying in his lane. Somebody had to keep their life steady. But somebody also had to do something drastic, and that ended up being me. When I was 28, a recruiter called about an ICU contract overseas, nearly triple what I was making in Ohio, tax-free with housing covered. I read that offer twice, sitting alone in my apartment, and thought, this is either going to look like abandonment or it's going to look like rescue, and I won't know which one for years. My mother drove me to the airport herself. She pressed a small tin of shortbread cookies into my hands at security, the way you'd send a child off to summer camp. "Don't stay away too long, sweetheart," she told me. I promised her 2 years. 2 years to erase the debt, then home for good. I ended up staying 7. People picture nurses working overseas and imagine palm trees and easy money. Here is what it actually looked like. 12-hour shifts in a unit where half my patients didn't speak English and neither did I, in their language. Christmas mornings spent charting vitals while my family opened presents over a video call with a 2-second delay. My grandmother's funeral watched from a hospital break room on a phone propped against a coffee machine. A 3-year relationship that ended quietly in year 2 because the man I was with told me, gently, that he couldn't keep loving someone who lived in a different time zone than her own heart. I paid off the last of my father's medical debt in year 3. I remember standing in a stairwell at the hospital, staring at the confirmation email, and crying for exactly the length of 1 flight of stairs. Then I wiped my face and went back to work, because that's what you do. And then I did something that made all of it feel worth it. I opened a separate savings account and named it Sunroom. My mother had wanted a small sunroom off the back of a house her entire adult life. Her own parents had cleaned other people's houses for a living. She grew up scrubbing floors she didn't own, and then she spent 4 decades hemming curtains for windows that weren't hers either. Every home she ever loved belonged to somebody else. When we were kids, she used to slow the car down whenever we passed the pretty older houses with covered porches on the better side of town. "Someday," she'd say quietly, "a little sunroom with good light." She never once asked for it directly. That was the whole shape of her. So every single month, after rent and after sending money home, whatever was left went into that account. By year 5, it had crossed $230,000, and I started making calls to realtors back in Ohio during my nights off. Every Sunday we talked on the phone, and every Sunday she asked if I was eating enough, and I looked at that account balance and said absolutely nothing about it. It was the best secret I ever kept. It was also the last good secret in this story. 18 months ago, I bought my mother a house, a 2-story colonial on Birchwood Lane, just outside Dayton. $598,000, close enough that everyone just called it 600. Big kitchen, a covered back porch, and yes, finally, a small glass sunroom off the side that caught the morning light exactly the way she used to describe it. I put down $240,000, nearly everything from that account, and carried the mortgage in my own name, auto-paid straight from my account overseas. I closed on it over a video call at 2 in the morning Gulf time, signing digital documents while the desert outside my window was still completely dark. Our family attorney, a careful, quiet man named Harold Beckett, handled everything. He gave me one piece of advice I didn't fully appreciate at the time. "Keep the title in your name for now," he said. "Protect it from anyone's creditors, and I do mean anyone's." There was a small pause on the line because we both knew, without saying it, that my brother's business had already started wobbling. The plan was simple. On my next long visit home, we'd finalize a trust that gave my mother a guaranteed lifetime right to live there, completely protected, no matter what happened to anyone else. Until then, my name stayed quietly on the deed, and almost nobody outside the 3 of us knew that. My mother told friends that her daughter had helped with the down payment because she didn't want my brother to feel small. I let her say it that way. That small kindness of hers is going to matter later, so hold on to it. The day she got her keys, she stood on that porch and cried into the collar of her cardigan. Then, before she'd even unpacked a single box, she went straight into the sunroom and just sat there in the light for 20 minutes. She started calling it the house Nora built. My father used to say that taking care of your mother wasn't something you said out loud. It was something you did. I thought I had finally done it. I had absolutely no idea the hardest part hadn't even started yet. Now let me tell you about my brother, and I want to be fair here, because for most of my life, Adam deserved fairness. 37 years old, a general contractor, good with his hands, good with people, the kind of guy who could win over an entire room at a barbecue. He married a woman named Priya 3 years ago at the courthouse, while I was mid-contract overseas and couldn't fly back for it. I'd only seen her once before, over a shaky video call, waving from the edge of the frame, never quite sitting down long enough to talk. Priya grew up moving constantly. Her family rented every place they ever lived. When she was 13, a landlord put her family's furniture out on the curb after a missed payment, and kids from her school walked past her mother's old couch on their way home. She told Adam early on that she would never, ever rent again. I understand that kind of scar completely. I just didn't yet understand what she'd be willing to do to make sure it never touched her again. About 16 months ago, Adam's contracting business collapsed. No warning, just gone, along with most of his savings. 2 months after that, the bank took his house. He called me exactly once during all of it, not to ask for help, but specifically to refuse it. I quietly offered him a no-interest loan, family terms, no deadline. He let the silence sit on the line for a long moment, then said something I still hear in my head. "You write checks, Nora. I show up." Then he laughed, like it was a joke between us. Neither of us believed that laugh for a second. He would rather drown than take a rope from his little sister, because taking the rope meant admitting he was actually in the water. Pride is expensive. I just didn't know yet exactly who would end up paying that bill. 2 months after the foreclosure, my mother called me with what she described as a small favor. "Honey, don't be upset," she started, which is never a good opening line. "Adam and Priya need somewhere to land just for a few weeks until he finds something. The house had 4 bedrooms and one 64-year-old woman living in it, of course. I said yes. I want that clearly on the record. I said yes because it was her home to share and because it was her son. I only set 2 conditions out loud with Adam right there on the call. Temporary, and my mother remains the lady of that house, full stop. Adam was warm about it, even gracious. "We'll take better care of Mom than she takes care of herself," he told me. And somewhere off camera, Priya's voice floated in, bright and syrupy. "We're so grateful, truly." That was the second time I'd ever heard my sister-in-law speak, and both times she stayed just out of frame. 3 months in, my mother mentioned, almost like an afterthought, that Priya's own mother, Deborah, had come to stay for the weekend because her landlord had raised her rent nearly 40% overnight. The weekend became a month. The month simply stopped being counted. When I asked my mother if she was comfortable with a 4th adult now living in her house, there was a pause I didn't like at all before she answered. "It's fine, honey. The house is big enough." I've replayed that pause more times than I can count. A 4-bedroom house. A widow who owned none of it on paper but believed, completely and reasonably, that she owned all of it in practice. 3 house guests who no longer believed they were guests at all. The wedding I missed overseas wasn't the expensive part of this story. The expensive part was every small, reasonable-sounding yes stacking up quietly, one on top of the other, like snow gathering on a roof. Nobody hears a beam start to bend. You only hear it the moment it finally breaks. 9 months ago, my mother had knee replacement surgery, and that surgery quietly became the hinge that everything else swung on. Adam called me himself that week, warm and organized. "We're setting Mom up on the 1st floor. No stairs on that knee, doctor's orders." It sounded thoughtful. It sounded exactly like something I would have suggested myself, which is precisely what made it such a clean, effective trap. Then her cell phone broke, and somehow it never got replaced with her own plan, just folded quietly into Adam's family account instead, which meant the Sunday video calls started happening on his tablet, in his kitchen, with him permanently at the edge of the frame. My mother started appearing on those calls in an apron. Her face looked thinner. Her hands looked rougher, red at the knuckles in the specific way hands get from constant dishwater, not gardening. When I asked why she looked so tired, Adam would lean in smoothly. "Mom loves staying busy, you know her." And my mother would smile at the camera the way someone smiles when they're reading a statement they didn't write. I want to be clear about something. I noticed, I am a nurse. Reading faces honestly is most of my job, so I started acting on it quietly from overseas. I mailed her a brand new phone. It never arrived, though tracking showed it delivered and signed for at the front door. I offered to pay for a cleaning service twice a week, my treat. Adam laughed it off. "We're family, Nora. We don't need strangers in the house." One Sunday, my mother said, very quietly, "Money's a little tight this month," and immediately changed the subject like she'd touched something hot. Here's exactly why I didn't get on a plane during any of that. My unit was in the middle of a major hospital accreditation review, and I was the lead nurse on it. Walking away would have meant losing my visa, breaking my contract, and abandoning 40 patients who depended on that unit running properly. I counted down the days on my banked leave the way other people count down to a wedding. 2 things finally sent me to the airport for real. The first was a flower delivery. For my mother's 64th birthday, I ordered a bouquet with photo confirmation because I've learned to trust proof more than promises. The photo came through at 9 in the morning her time, and in the background of that photo, on her own birthday, was a woman hanging laundry in a thin, worn housecoat. The second was an email from June Alvarez, my mother's oldest friend from church, 71 years old and sharp as anything. The subject line simply read, "Is your mother all right?" She wrote that Grace had stopped coming to services, and that the week before, she'd seen my mother carrying heavy grocery bags across a wet parking lot in the rain, while a younger blonde woman sat dry inside the car, scrolling her phone. June ended the email with one sentence that took the air out of me. "I don't like to interfere, but somebody has clearly been rearranging your mother, and I thought her daughter should know." I read that email during a night shift, standing alone in a supply closet, and I went very calm and very cold, the exact way I go when a patient starts to crash on the monitor. My accreditation review had just cleared. 3 weeks of banked leave got approved that same Friday. I booked a flight home and told absolutely no. One in Ohio, especially not Adam. Then I emailed Harold Beckett and confirmed the appointment we'd been planning to finalize for 2 years. Friday, 3 o'clock, sign the trust. I printed the entire file and zipped it into my backpack. The deed, the mortgage documents, the closing paperwork. Paper weighs almost nothing, and it can still hold an entire house up. 20 hours in the air, and I rehearsed exactly one sentence the whole way. Surprise, Mom. I never once got to say it. If you've made it this far and you're already feeling the tension building, drop a single word in the comments describing how you'd feel walking up to your own front door and being mistaken for the cleaning staff. This story only gets more intense from here, so stay with me. The taxi turned onto Birchwood Lane at 11 that morning, and there was a strange SUV parked in my mother's driveway like it had grown roots there. I rang the doorbell of the house I bought, standing there in a ball cap and sunglasses, backpack over one shoulder, 20 hours of travel written all over me. The door opened, and a blonde woman in a silk robe, coffee mug in hand, looked me over like she was inspecting produce. What I didn't know yet was that Priya had posted an ad that week for part-time help to clean before her dinner party. So when she saw a tired woman in a ball cap standing on the porch, she didn't see family. She saw the hired help arriving. "Oh, you're here about the cleaning," she said, already turning away. "The maid's out back, she'll show you what needs doing." The maid. Then her phone rang, and she walked off answering it, leaving my own front door hanging open behind her like an afterthought. I stood there for a second, letting that sentence finish landing fully. Then I stepped into my own foyer like a complete stranger. New candles scent in the air. New photos on the mantle, Adam and Priya at the courthouse, Priya on some beach, Priya's mother holding a wine glass. The spot where my father's photograph used to hang now held a small framed sign reading, "Bless this home." Somewhere upstairs, a television talked to an empty room. And from the backyard came a sound I recognized before I could even name it. A scrape, then a slosh, over and over. A scrub brush against stone. I walked toward that sound with my heart pounding like an alarm, and I already knew, the way you know bad news is coming before anyone says a word, exactly who I was about to find. My mother was on her knees on a folded towel, scrubbing the patio in a black apron. 64 years old, 9 months past knee surgery, kneeling on cold stone. Her rose bushes, the entire reason she'd fallen in love with that backyard, had been shoved into plastic pots in a shady corner to make room for new patio furniture with the price tags still attached. "Mom," I said. She turned, and for half a second I got the entire sunrise, her whole face lighting up, my name breaking open in her mouth. "Nora!" And then, and I will never forget this, the light behind her eyes slammed shut. Her gaze snapped to the house windows, checking. She pushed herself up, wincing on that knee before I could even reach her, gripped both my arms, and whispered right there in her own backyard, "Oh, honey, you can't just show up, they don't like surprises." She was whispering about them in her own home. My mother hugged me hard, then held me at arm's length like something she'd get in trouble for having. Her wrists were thinner than her gardening gloves. Her knuckles were cracked and red. Dishwater hands. The last time I'd held these hands, they'd smelled like rose fertilizer and hand lotion. I kept my voice level, my nurse voice, and asked her why she was scrubbing the patio. "Priya's having her dinner club tonight," she said. "I don't mind, honey, it keeps me busy." Keeps her busy. Where had I heard that exact phrase before? I asked why she was wearing an apron in her own backyard, and she looked down at it like she'd forgotten it was even there. And then she said the thing that told me the entire shape of what had happened. "Please don't say anything about the money." Then she caught herself, both hands flying to her mouth, eyes wide, like the words had slipped out entirely on their own. She wouldn't explain the money yet, so instead I asked her to show me her room. That's when the tour of my own house turned into something closer to a crime scene walk. She led me through the kitchen, past a counter crowded with party trays, into a small sunroom off the laundry area, the very room she used to sit in for 20 minutes at a time, now holding a folding cot, a card table with her pills lined up in a plastic organizer, and cardboard boxes labeled Grace in somebody else's handwriting, still stacked and unopened after 9 months. Her wedding photo with my father sat on the windowsill, right next to a bottle of dish soap. Upstairs, she told me plainly, Adam and Priya had the primary bedroom now, because of her. Knee and the stairs. Priya's mother had taken my mother's old bedroom, the one with the good morning light. The third bedroom had become Priya's craft room. The rose wallpaper my mother had chosen the very week she got her keys, wallpaper she'd waited over 60 years to finally pick for a room that was entirely hers, had been stripped off the walls. "Florals date a house," Priya had apparently said. My mother told me this without 1 ounce of anger in her voice, and that absence of anger scared me more than shouting ever could have. Anger has a bottom. Quiet acceptance doesn't. On the refrigerator, held up by a pizza delivery magnet, was a laminated sheet titled House Schedule. Grace, laundry, Monday and Thursday. Grace, bathrooms, Tuesday. Grace, dinner, daily. Small checkboxes in Priya's rounded handwriting. My mother had a laminated chore chart in the house I had personally paid for. I was still staring at that chart when the garage door rumbled beneath the floor, and my mother's hand closed tightly around my sleeve. "That's Adam. Honey, please be nice." My brother walked in carrying grocery bags and froze for half a breath. Then I watched him actively choose a face. He chose delighted. Big arms, big hug, a booming laugh. "Why didn't you call? Priya, look who's here." Priya appeared in the doorway, and I watched her instantly rewind the entire morning in her head, the porch, the ball cap, the sentence. To her credit, she didn't flinch at all. She simply recalculated. "You should have called ahead, I'd have made up the guest room," she said, sweet all the way through. What guest room? Every bedroom in that house was already full. From the living room came a voice like a bell being rung for staff. "Ellen, iced tea, lemon this time." That was my introduction to Deborah, 59 years old, installed comfortably in my mother's old bedroom, summoning my mother by the wrong first name entirely, like an appliance that occasionally answered back. And my mother, 9 months of physical therapy in that knee, simply moved. I asked Adam pleasantly why our mother was sleeping next to a washing machine. His hand landed warm on my shoulder. "Stairs are bad for her knee, you'd know that if you'd been here, but you weren't." He said it kindly, which somehow made it worse. Priya slid in smoothly behind him. "We keep Mom on a nice little routine. Seniors really do thrive on structure, I read that somewhere." I smiled and nodded, and inside I went as quiet and still as a patient right before a code. In the ICU, you don't scream at an infection. You chart it carefully, so I started charting. If someone in your own family is quietly living off a parent right now while calling it help, this next part is for you specifically. Comment the word deed if you're staying with me until 9 o'clock tonight, because the doorbell is about to ring on all of them. Lunch told me everything else I still needed to know. Priya set 4 plates at the table and 1 on a tray. "Mom likes eating in her room," she explained to me, with my mother standing right there listening to every word. I pulled out the chair beside mine instead. "Sit with me, Mom." You would have thought I'd pulled a fire alarm. 3 full seconds of total stillness. Then my mother sat down, hands folded in her lap like a girl called into the principal's office. Priya's smile thinned into something like wire. "We have a system here, Nora. Everyone in this house earns their keep. Mom understands that." Earns her keep, in the house her own daughter had bought. Deborah dabbed her mouth delicately. "It's called contributing, dear. Our generation understands that." Her generation, despite being 5 years younger than my mother, and the only thing I ever saw her contribute all day was an ice request. Adam talked through the entire meal, loud and sunny, laying out future plans. A fire pit for the backyard, composite decking for the porch. And down the line, who knows, he said, waving his fork toward the walls, "Maybe we fix the place up and sell it, get something with real acreage." Sell, he said, easy as passing the salt about a house that was never his, while our mother kept her eyes fixed on her plate, and I quietly did the math on 14 months of tension sitting in her shoulders. Nobody at that table had any idea what was zipped inside the backpack hanging off the back of my chair. I stood, kissed the top of my mother's head, and said I needed to run to the bank after such a long flight. It was even true. Priya waved me off cheerfully. Adam told me to take the truck. I took the rental instead, and on my way out, I took the stack of opened mail sitting on the counter with me too. While we'd been clearing lunch, I'd spotted an envelope with my mother's name showing through the plastic window, already opened, though not by her, because she flinched the moment I touched it. A store credit card statement. Grace Whitfield, $3,800 in balance, I read. The charges twice. A boutique, a day spa, 2 restaurant tabs the size of small car payments, a hair salon. My mother hasn't sat in a salon chair since my father's funeral, and she would sooner double her church donation than spend $40 on lunch out. The signature line on those receipts wasn't even a convincing forgery of her handwriting. In the kitchen, with the tap running loud on purpose to cover us, my mother finally gave me the real shape of the money in a whisper. Priya had borrowed the card for convenience. And every single month, my mother handed Adam $600 in cash straight from her Social Security check. He called it grocery money. He collected it, her exact word, collected on the 3rd of every month, the day right after her check landed. 14 months straight. I did the multiplication standing right there at the sink, the same fast, cold way I calculate medication doses. $8,400 in grocery money. $3,800 on the card. Just over $12,000, taken from a widow whose entire monthly check was under $2,000. Please don't say anything, my mother whispered. He gets loud about money. I dried my hands, folded the statement into my jacket, and told her we were going to the bank right now together. From the living room, Priya's voice sailed in. Ellen, the patio isn't finished. And for the first time in 14 months, my mother didn't answer to the wrong name at all. She simply went and got her coat. While she searched for her good shoes in that little sunroom, I picked her Bible up off the folding cot where it had slipped, and an envelope slid loose from inside Psalms into my hand. I shouldn't have looked. I am endlessly glad that I did. It was an application to Golden Meadow Senior Living, filled out in my mother's careful, practiced cursive. Behind it, a confirmation letter placing her on a waiting list, dated 3 weeks earlier. Behind that, a receipt for a $75 deposit to hold her spot, saved, I knew without asking, in 1s and 5s from whatever was left of a check that somebody else was already collecting from. My mother had been quietly planning to move herself out of the house her own daughter had bought her, out of the yard with the roses she loved into a waiting list, so she wouldn't be a burden to the very people already living entirely off of her. She caught me holding it. She didn't grab it back. She simply straightened up with that seamstress's quiet dignity and said, "It's a nice place, honey. They let you keep 2 flower pots." 2 flower pots. I had bought that woman an entire yard full of good sunlight, and the people living upstairs had shrunk her whole world down to 2 pots on a strange windowsill. Nobody is going anywhere, Mom, I told her, except the people currently upstairs. At the bank, I asked for 14 months of statements, printed and stamped. While the printer ran, an older teller leaned in and told me quietly that they'd flagged unusual activity on the account once before, but the gentleman on file had explained it as rent. My mother had added Adam as an authorized user months earlier to help manage bills during recovery, and had tried to remove him back in the spring, but removing an authorized user required both parties present, and Adam had stayed conveniently busy for 3 straight months of Saturdays. Printed statements told the whole ugly rhythm in black and white. Social Security lands on the 2nd, $600 withdrawn on the 3rd, 14 times in a row, like a metronome, plus smaller charges scattered throughout each month. We fixed everything we could on the spot. A brand new account in both our names, new passwords, her Social Security redirected starting the next cycle. The old account frozen pending review, with a formal dispute filed on every questionable charge. Her phone buzzed on the counter, the cheap replacement Adam had eventually allowed her on his family plan. A text from Priya. Party at 6, guests at 6:30 sharp, wear the black apron. My mother read that message in the bank parking lot, thumb hovering over a reply, 14 months of automatic yes loaded up in one gesture. I took the phone gently from her hand and read it again myself, and something in me went very still and very clear, because do you see what Priya had just done without even realizing it? She had built a stage. She had personally invited an audience, 6 women from the neighborhood and the church, into my house that night to watch her play Lady of the Manor with my mother cast as the help. Every single witness I could ever want, hand-delivered with place cards already set. She built the stage. I simply decided to change the ending of the play. I checked the dashboard clock. 2:41, lawyer at 3. Locksmith on standby for 7:30, already booked from the bank lobby like a routine errand. Guests arriving at 6:30. I had one single aff. Turn noon to take my house back, and for the first time since that doorbell rang, I felt like I was back on shift. Calm, prepared, right on time. Harold Beckett's office smells like old paper and furniture polish, and it remains my favorite smell in the state of Ohio. 3 o'clock, the appointment I'd made from the other side of the world, back when this trip was still supposed to be a happy surprise. The deed came out of my backpack slightly creased from 20 hours of flying, and Harold flattened it out on the desk like he was calming something restless. By 4, we had rebuilt the ground completely under my mother's feet. First, the trust, 2 years in the drafting, the house placed permanently inside it, with my mother holding an unbreakable right to live there for the rest of her life. Untouchable by creditors, untouchable by charm, untouchable by anyone at that table, and I made Harold right in specifically, not even by me. Second, an entirely new will. The old one, written at 28 with a lot of airport sentimentality, had split everything evenly between my mother and Adam. The new one left everything to my mother, and after her, established a nursing scholarship in my father's name. Adam's name doesn't appear anywhere in it. That isn't cruelty. That's simply accuracy. Third, 3 formal letters revoking permission to occupy the property, effective that same night. 1 each for Adam, Priya, and Deborah. Fourth, a repayment agreement. Just over $12,000, $250 a month, ready and waiting for a signature. Here's what I want you to hold on to while I set the table for what happened at that dinner party. The deed, the trust, the stamped bank statements, none of that was luck. That was 7 years of receipts. If you're still with me and you believe family should never involve a laminated chore chart, subscribe now, because the doorbell is about to ring right on schedule. 6:30 arrived exactly on time. 6 guests walked in with wine and covered dishes, completely unaware they'd been invited to something other than a dinner party. My mother's china came out, the same set she and my father had picked together decades earlier, the set normally reserved only for holidays. Deborah ran a finger along the gold rim and asked where it came from. "Oh, it came with the house," Priya said breezily. There it was, their entire philosophy laid out on one shelf. As far as Priya was concerned, my mother had simply come with the house too. I wore the black apron myself that night, tying it on in front of everyone, taking my mother's place at the buffet without a word of explanation. The one pouring the tea hears every conversation at the table. Being invisible turned out to be the very best seat in the house. Adam stood near the end of dinner and tapped his glass with a knife, gathering the room with his eyes. "Real family shows up," he announced, glancing my way just briefly enough for everyone to catch it. "Some people chase money on the other side of the world and mail a check at Christmas. But the ones who stay under this roof, they're what actually makes a home." That's when my mother put her fork down entirely. 64 years old, knee and all, she pushed back her chair and stood up at that table. "Her name is Ellen," she said, louder than I'd heard her speak in years. "And this," Adam's voice cut across her like a gavel. "Sit." The table went completely silent, and that, right there, was the last brick. I untied the apron, folded it once, and laid it over the back of my chair. Then I lifted my backpack from the floor, took out a pale folder, and set it down beside the dessert plates. "Since we're toasting this roof, Adam," I said, "tell the table whose name is actually on this house." He laughed, but his eyes went straight to the folder. I slid the deed across the tablecloth until it stopped directly in front of him. He read my full legal name out loud, and I watched the color drain out of his face exactly the way it drains from a patient 30 seconds before the monitor tells you what's already happening. I laid out every remaining paper in order: the deed, the trust, the 3 revocation letters, and finally the bank statements with the stamp still shiny. I explained it all in the same flat, clear voice I use for a shift handoff. This is my house. This is my mother's protected right to live in it for the rest of her life. This is your notice to vacate by 9 o'clock tonight. And this is $12,300 taken from a woman living on $1,800 a month, which Ohio has both a name and a felony statute for. Adam signed the repayment agreement at my father's old kitchen table an hour later, pen shaking slightly in his hand. By 8:50, suitcases were rolling down the driveway. At 9 o'clock exactly, a locksmith placed 2 new sets of keys into my palm, and the new deadbolt turned over with the most peaceful click I'd heard in 7 years. We carried my mother's things back up the stairs she'd been banished from for 9 long months. Her wedding photo went back on the dresser. Her Bible went back on the nightstand, envelope gone from inside it for good. She sat down slowly on the edge of that bed, smoothed the quilt flat with both cracked hands, careful, like she was still afraid of wrinkling something that belonged to someone else. Then she remembered it was hers. And that's when she finally came apart, the good kind of coming apart, the kind that only happens once a person is finally allowed to stop apologizing. 3 weeks later, the first $250 landed in her account, right on time. Her rose bushes went back into the sunniest corner of the yard, exactly where the fire pit was supposed to go, and new growth was already showing on the canes. She tore up that senior living application herself and dropped it straight into the compost bin. "It should at least feed the roses," she said. My father used to say that taking care of your mother was never something you said with words. It was something you did with your hands and your name on the right paperwork. It took me 7 years overseas and one single dinner party to finally understand exactly what that meant. If this story reminded you to go check whose name is actually on a deed, or who's listed as your parents' emergency contact, do it this week, today if you can. If you've ever watched someone mistake a person's kindness for weakness, share this with them. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.